My grandfather was a strange man, even for a clockmaker, not eccentric in the way artists often are, or absent-minded like some academics, but peculiar in a manner that made you feel slightly off-kilter whenever you were in his presence. He wasn't that old when he passed, just 68. My grandmother found him in his workshop, slumped over his workbench, a half-finished grandfather clock ticking beside him, its gears whirring with an almost mocking cheerfulness. It's been almost 3 months since then, and the dust has finally settled on the inheritance. My aunt, always the practical one, received the house. My cousin, the aspiring musician, inherited the antique phonograph collection, a truly impressive array of cylinders and discs that would make any audiophile swoon. And me. What did I, his eldest grandchild, inherit? Clocks. Boxes and boxes of clocks. At first, I thought it was a joke. Grandfather Elias, with his dry wit and penchant for riddles, was surely having one last laugh from beyond the grave over a dozen crates, each filled with timepieces of every conceivable size and shape, from delicate pocket watches, no bigger than my thumb, to imposing mantle clocks that looked like miniature cathedrals. They were meticulously packed, each nestled in velvet-lined compartments within custom-built wooden boxes, labeled from Alpha to Omega. These aren't just any old clocks, Daniel, he used to tell me, his eyes twinkling behind his thick spectacles. These are special. When I'd press him, asking, "But why are they special, grandfather?" he'd just offer that cryptic, knowing smile and say, "I'll tell you when you're older." He never did. He never got the chance. And now here I am, stuck with what appears to be an endless supply of peculiar timepieces. The clocks are categorized in his old, leather-bound ledgers, each marked as an anomaly, and given a specific designation and a location. It always struck me how meticulously he labeled them, even though they came from dozens of different eras and workshops. It was baffling to me how he could go to any antique fair or dusty old second-hand shop and sift through shelves of discarded items and find exactly what he was looking for. He'd only find one or two, if he was lucky, which he'd slip into the pocket of his tweed jacket before offering to buy me a vanilla ice cream in exchange for joining him on his hunts. The boxes are stacked in my spare room, about 14 of them in total, all full of these clocks. Grandfather's old brass loop, a tool he used for inspecting intricate clockwork, sits on my desk next to the pile of ledgers. It's battered and scratched in places, a strip of yellowing parchment with his name, Elias Thorne, written on it and pasted to the side. I pull my chair out from the desk and sit down heavily, letting out a long sigh. I take off my reading glasses and set them on the table, pinching and massaging the bridge of my nose. My headache has only gotten worse since this morning. Where am I supposed to put these boxes? I don't have any use for them, but I can't bring myself to toss them, not when I know they meant so much to my grandfather. My roommates have been understanding enough, giving me the space I need to process grandfather's passing, but I can't exactly ask them to let me use the limited storage space we have to stow 14 boxes of, well, what feels like intricate, yet ultimately perplexing, junk. I lean back in my chair, resting my head against my hand. I regard the stack of boxes like I'm trying to win a staring contest. Why clocks? Couldn't you have collected something more immediately useful, like vintage instruments or rare books? Something inherently interesting? A conversation starter that didn't involve me explaining my grandfather's unique kind of obsession that led him to spend most of his disposable income on old timepieces. After a long, quiet moment of giving the stack of boxes my best rendition of the Kubrick stare, I finally stand up, picking out box Alpha. I set it down on the desk and remove the lid. They're just how I remember them, neatly packed in the wooden box in 2 rows, going down the box lengthwise. They fit snugly, without any space to shift or rattle about. I run my fingers down the row of clocks, making that pleasing, soft clicking noise of metal against wood. I pull out a random one and flip it over. Anomaly number 003. Box Alpha. The Bell Tower of St. Augustine, 1978. I sit back down and shift to face my desk. I fidget with the clock in one hand, tapping my thumb against its ornate face as I crack open Ledger Alpha. It's catalogued on the second page. The Bell Tower of St. Augustine, 1978. Confession of Father Thomas Miller. Transcript from page 12 to 14. I flip through, finding the page quickly, then turning my attention to grandfather's old brass loop. I remember he used to tell me that each clock had a hidden compartment, a tiny drawer where a miniature scroll of parchment would be tucked away. After a moment of searching, I find it, a minuscule latch on the clock's side. It pops open with a soft click, and I carefully extract the tightly rolled scroll. The man's voice is hoarse and tired. My name is Father Thomas Miller. I was told to record this statement by my superior as a way to process what I witnessed. There's a long pause, the sound of shuffling parchment. This statement is in regards to the incident that occurred during my posting at the Bell Tower of St. Augustine in 1978. He clears his throat. I was a young priest then, fresh out of seminary, eager to serve. The bell tower was my favorite place in the church, a place of peace and contemplation. Every evening, just before Vespers, I would climb the winding stairs to ring the bells. It was a clear, quiet night, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels. I was alone, as usual. That first evening passed without incident, but then I started getting the feeling I was being watched. When I was climbing the stairs that first day, it got so quiet, just the sound of my own breathing and the creak of the old wooden steps. When I brought it up with the elder priests, they said it was just in my head, but I didn't buy it. There was just something profoundly unsettling about it to me. When I found the gargoyle on the roof, facing inwards instead of outwards, I should have turned back, but I didn't. It's probably just a prank, Father, they said, or the wind moved it. We continued our duties as normal. I only got about an hour of rest before the ringing began. It wasn't the bells of St. Augustine. It was different, a discordant, metallic shriek that vibrated through the very stones of the church. I threw on my cassock and rushed to the bell tower. I wanted to see what was making that noise. The tower was calm and quiet until it wasn't. I heard the scuttling through the rafters first. I was on edge, so I immediately turned to look. It looked like a shadow at first, a shifting, inky blackness. I spoke up first, calling out to it. "Who's there?" I said. I was always a friendly guy. I think maybe if I didn't say anything, I'd still be there. It shambled out into the beam of my flashlight, and the man takes a shaky breath. It hurt to look at. Even now, it hurts to think about it. It was like a swarm of insects, but where the swarm should be, there were only gears, tatters of tiny, intricate gears, whirring and grinding, forming a vaguely humanoid shape. It shimmered and shifted like a mirage. I stumbled back, and I held out my crucifix as if I could stop it. I hate to say it, but I fled. I turned tail and ran as fast as I could, back down the winding stairs. Hearing the thing whirring only made me run faster. I grabbed my Bible, half full, leaving the bell tower behind. I didn't stop running until I passed out in the streets. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Some passers-by had found me. Luckily, before I caught hypothermia, they never found anything, just my crucifix, right where I dropped it when it showed up. That's all. That's it. There's a soft click, and the scroll feels like it's finished. I feel a pit in my stomach. As I close the ledger and set it aside, there's a morbid curiosity brewing in me, a dark fascination that compels me to continue. I'm hardly even paying attention when I put the clock back in its place, in the box. I don't know what to say other than that I'm going to have a lot of listening to do. A few of you showed interest in learning more about grandfather's collection. It's a pretty formidable amount of clocks. I counted about 30 in each box, except for box Omega, which I suppose he was still working on when he, pass away. I've been avoiding going into my spare room since it's where I'm keeping them, but I'm honestly too curious to keep it up. One of you suggested I perform a cleansing ritual before examining any more of these. I'm not a religious guy, but my roommate Liam is, so I've borrowed one of his rosaries, which now sits on my desk next to the loop. I did give the first ledger a read though, at least just through the names of them. Some are labeled with town names from around the States and Europe, but a lot of them don't have that information to go with. An even smaller amount of them have addresses to go with them, but when I looked into them, they were all different psychiatric facilities or obscure historical societies. So then, now what? I'm looking at the desk with the ledgers, my laptop open to Google Earth, and grandfather's loop. My head hurts just thinking about that peculiar clock. Some of you suggested that my grandfather had been living some sort of secret double life, but I just can't wrap my brain around that thought. By all accounts, Grandfather Elias was a normal guy, a loving husband, a dedicated clockmaker, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood with his wife, happily married, working in his cozy workshop. He was just normal, perhaps even a bit mundane, except for those clocks. I finally get up and walk over to the stack of boxes. I pick up box beta, along with its corresponding ledger. I don't waste any time futzing around, picking out a clock, anomaly 228. Box beta, the whispering walls of Blackwood Manor. I find the transcript, anomaly number 228. Box beta, the whispering walls of Blackwood Manor. Testimony of Clara Dubois. Here we go.
Okay, okay. It's a woman's voice. Fairly young. I'm Clara Dubois, recording this statement as suggested by Dr. Aris, regarding my previous place of residence. It feels like she's reading from a script, just like Father Thomas. So, about a year ago, I moved into an old manor with my husband and his business partner. It was a pretty nice place, all things considered, a grand home on a sprawling plot of land. My husband and his friend are architects, and I work as a historian, so the three of us make a decent amount of money.
At the time, though, I wasn't able to work because of an injury I sustained during a riding accident 2 weeks before. It was a broken leg and a concussion, nothing fatal, but enough to keep me from going to work for at least a little while. It was for the best, seeing as it meant I could spend time making the house nice. The house, it was on a hill, backing onto acres worth of untamed woodland for the backyard. There was a neglected rose garden, a crumbling stone fountain, a rusty wrought iron gate. It was like a gothic romance dream come true. And then my husband and his friend had to go to a conference in London, and I was alone for a few days. It wasn't anything I couldn't handle. I was an adult, but I got the feeling I wasn't alone. On the second night, I went downstairs around midnight, I think, just to get a glass of water. There's a grand staircase in the main hall that faces the back gardens, and on my way to the kitchen, I passed by it. Something caught my eye out there. It looked like I nearly jump out of my skin as someone knocks at the door to my spare room. I quickly put the scroll back in the clock and put the clock aside, getting up to check who's there. My roommate Ben stands in the doorway, holding a padded envelope in his hand. "It's for you," he says, a slight quizzical tone to his voice. I rarely receive physical mail. I thank him and take the note. He closes the door behind him as he leaves. I sit back down and retrieve the clock, carefully extracting the scroll again. Like a figure, almost like a person, standing in my back garden, I held the glass against my head while I looked out at it. It was like a person wearing a shroud, like a morbid approximation of a specter. It didn't move, just stood there, the fabric blowing in the wind lightly. I reached for the light switch to the garden. I flicked it on, and it was gone. It must have been my imagination, just my nerves about being alone in the house. I decided to just forget about it and take my water back to my room. I flicked off the light. I started walking back towards the stairs, and then I heard it, a faint scraping noise. When I turned, it was... Her voice falters for a moment. It was standing at my back door, its arms lifted up from under the shroud. It makes me sick just thinking about it, but it looked like someone had been stripped of their outer layer, as if it weren't organic, but it wasn't fresh. The sinews were rotting, turned gray and blackened at the fingertips, all smudged with grave dirt, like it had just crawled out of its tomb. I screamed. I didn't know what else to do, but my closest neighbor would be too far away to hear me. It just kept scraping, not even aggressive, just scraping. I started to hear it breathing too, labored and desperate, like its throat was too constricted to drag in enough air to keep it alive. I pleaded with it, asking what it wanted, why it was there, but it just stood there. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I don't know how long I was standing there, staring at it. It felt like hours. Finally, I worked up the courage to step forward, and I turned on the backlight, and it was gone. It didn't give me any relief. I knew if I turned off the light, it might. She lets out a choked noise. I don't want to think about it. I went back upstairs, leaving the light on. I couldn't sleep that night.
I didn't even think about telling my husband. I knew he'd just call me crazy. We stayed in that house for 2 years, and every time I was there alone at night, I could hear it scraping. I'm not crazy, doctor.
The scroll feels like it's finished. The pit in my stomach is back, and my head hurts. But the only thing I can think of is why? Why were these important enough for my grandfather to pass them down to me? Why did he collect them? And why do I feel like there's eyes on me right now? Every time I come into my spare room, I feel it. Like the clocks themselves are staring at me. I feel as though the answer to why my grandfather kept these things is just out of reach. Like if I could only remember, everything would be made clear. I put the scroll back in the clock and put the clock back in the box, setting it back with the rest of them. I close the ledger as well, and then I look at the letter. It's a white padded envelope with an address and name written on the back. 347 Oldwick Lane, from Professor Alistair Finch, head of the Kronos Observation Bureau. It sounds familiar, but the pit in my stomach only grows. I open my desk drawer and put the letter inside. I don't think I can handle reading it yet. If any of you know what that bureau is, I hope you'll let me know. I've been having trouble sleeping now. It's not surprising. Listening to people's harrowing experiences has always been tough for me, especially whatever kind of perplexing events are associated with those clocks. But it's less about not being able to sleep. Sure, it takes some tossing and turning. It's more about staying asleep. I keep having nightmares. One's bad enough to wake me up in a cold sweat. But when I wake up, I can't remember what happened in them. All I know is that my hands are shaking, and it feels like I didn't get any rest at all. I suppose you could tell I was losing sleep, seeing as I made a mistake in my last post. When I was transcribing the incident, I didn't catch it. I was half falling asleep writing everything down. But that's not relevant, I don't think. I don't want to believe that the last thing I have of my grandfather is somehow doing this to me. Some of you thought that maybe knowing my grandfather's cause of passing would help me solve whatever's going on. I figured maybe I could elaborate a little for you. My grandmother told my aunt and I about it a month ago, after she'd recovered from the initial shock. She said it was at 7:15 in the morning. They'd just finished breakfast, and my grandfather had gone out to his workshop to tinker. He liked to do that when he was alive, just putter around with his tools, so it wasn't strange to her when he didn't come in after an hour. My grandmother got worried and went to check on him. He was lying on the ground, face down, a faint ticking noise coming from within him. His eyes had already gone cloudy, almost white, and there was a strange metallic sheen on his skin, one that wasn't there before. His hands were covered in fine brass filings. She begged the coroner to do an examination on him, but my grandmother still refuses to tell us what was truly found. Something was wrong with his internal mechanisms, she said. Maybe a gear slipped or a spring snapped, but I called her up to ask, and no matter what I said, I got nothing from her. I can't blame her. It still hurts. I'll try reaching out to the coroner. I looked more into that Kronos Observation Bureau thing. I found postings about it in a few old internet forums, and one or two on Reddit. Most forums were people expressing confusion about some peculiar advertisements they'd seen posted on bulletin boards in universities and museums, posted on lampposts and sent with flyers in the mail. They were all described in similar ways. A picture of a silhouetted person holding an hourglass, titled in block letters with the question, "Is time weighing you down?" The irony of this title is certainly not lost on me. Usually under the picture was a paragraph asking all manner of strange, wide-sweeping questions, like, do you have memories that feel out of place, or have other specialists dismissed your experiences? Underneath that, there was a phone number, an email address, and another set of block letter text, proclaiming, "Don't wait, reclaim your time now." And finally, at the bottom of the page, there was that line of text, stringing it to the clocks, courtesy of the Kronos Observation Bureau. I couldn't find any posts describing what this place was, nor could I find anyone who knew exactly how long the Bureau had been going on. I think the earliest clock I could find was from 1884, just a year after the first mass-produced alarm clocks were invented. I figured I might examine it now. It's from Box Juliet, anomaly number 001, Box Juliet, the shifting sands of the Sahara. Testimony of Abdullah Khan, the soft click of the miniature scroll being set into the loop is almost comforting now. At least the oddness of whatever is happening is contained to a small scroll, rather than spilling out into the real world. Like all this Kronos stuff, I try to shake the thought out of my head and begin reading the scroll.
Okay, you again, Professor Thorne. It's an honor to...
It's a quiet voice, meek, belonging to a young man. There's the sound of rustling parchment. Right, I'll get on with it. I'm Abdullah Khan, recording this statement in partnership with the Kronos Observation Bureau, as suggested by Professor Thorne, regarding a phenomenon I witnessed last summer. He clears his throat a little.
I don't usually take solo trips into the desert. It's risky to do it. You never really know what you're gonna find out there in the middle of nowhere. But I'm a pretty big guy. I've never backed down from a challenge once in my life. But I'm fairly imposing due to my height and build. I digress though. Well, it was about 10:30 in the evening, and I was driving from Cairo to Luxor, crossing a long stretch of the Sahara. It was a pretty warm night, but a sandstorm was brewing, so I had my headlights on. It was truly quiet out that night, aside from the wind and the hiss of the sand against my vehicle. I was listening to an old radio program to pass the time.
I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. He was a few inches shorter than me, wearing an ancient flowing desert cloak and sandals, holding a staff out into the road. I pulled over to the shoulder to let him in. You can't exactly blame me, right? It was a sandstorm. The poor fellow was going to be buried alive. I asked him if he needed a ride, and he said yes, climbed in the passenger seat, and pulled his hood back. He was a normal-looking guy, but he was pale in the face, a wild, queasy look in a pair of eyes that kept darting to look out the window like he was being followed. So, what brings you out to the desert this late? I asked. He whipped his head around to face me with that look on his face. It made me jump. I was walking, he said. His voice was rough and shaky. I didn't believe him for a second. Where are you headed? I asked. He just shook his head a little and went back to glancing out the window. Anywhere, to the nearest oasis, I suppose. I could do that. I prayed it would be there quickly. I didn't try to make any more small talk. I didn't try to speak or engage with him. In fact, I didn't even want to look at the guy. Well, after what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes, I finally glanced up at him. He wasn't peeking out the window anymore. He was staring out the windshield and up slightly at the swirling sand above. There he was. He was expelling sand from his eyes, and it wasn't just a thin stream either. It was all over his chin and mouth, making a dark, gritty puddle on his cloak, but he didn't even seem to notice. He was breathing heavily, throat dry and hoarse. As he did, I opened my mouth to tell him he was expelling sand, but before I could, he grabbed my wrist. His hand was abrasive, like sandpaper. His eyes, pull over, he demanded. He didn't have to tell me twice. I did what he told me, and he let go. He slammed the door open and rushed down into the sandstorm, the wind howling overhead as he stumbled into a dune and fell to his knees. He started screaming, laughing, looking up at the sky, yelling that he knew it was there, that it could unravel him, tear him apart, until nothing was left. You're going to think I'm crazy, but when he was shouting up at whatever it was, I saw the desert move. It was like a warp in my vision, like a mirage, a movement in the shape of something gigantic. It was like seeing something that was there but that I wasn't supposed to see. The man screamed at the top of his lungs, and I saw him crumple forwards, hitting the ground with a soft thud as he laid there in the sand. The thing that turned to me, and for a moment, I could see its open, glowing ochre eyes, staring me down. I closed the car door and hit the gas as hard as I could, and I didn't dare look back. I still think about that guy sometimes. He left a fine layer of sand on my passenger seat, just a dusting, but sometimes it feels like he's still sitting there. The scroll feels like it's finished, and once again, I'm sitting in a silent room. My head hurts again, and my hands shake as I put the scroll back in its compartment. I feel sick to my stomach when I put the clock back into the box. I clench my hands a little before opening the drawer and pulling out the letter. I reach over to my cup of pens and take out the letter opener. The paper slices open easily, and I unfold the piece of paper inside. It reads as follows: Mr. Bradshaw, I would like to express my deepest condolences regarding your grandfather's passing. Losses in the family are difficult to overcome, so I thought I might reach out to you on behalf of the Kronos Observation Bureau. However, there is a pressing matter I would like to discuss with you. Your grandfather was in possession of some missing property of ours. As we understand it, he was making a collection of some very pertinent chronographs that are strictly confidential to those working at the Bureau. We would like them back, Mr. Bradshaw. You're a smart man, so you can likely understand that keeping these would be detrimental to your temporal well-being. Please respond to this letter as soon as possible to negotiate a drop-off point for these clocks and perhaps schedule a session with one of our chronotherapists. I will offer for you to have this session pro bono as a token of my appreciation of your cooperation. Regards, Professor Alistair Finch. Here, I fold the paper back up and set it back in the drawer. I eye the stack of boxes, feeling them stare back at me. Was that a threat? If they're confidential, what if I'd examine them? I don't know what to make of all this. I only know I'm not going to be giving those clocks back. I think I've only scratched the surface. If any of you can make heads or tails of this, I'd appreciate your help. My sleep hasn't exactly been improving since I opened that letter. If anything, it's only made things more complicated. Every time I try to get any rest, that disconcerting letter pops into my mind, that thinly veiled threat all over some peculiar clocks. I tried to keep my mind off it for a day or so, spent some time with my friends, and stayed out of my spare room. It brought me some relief for a little while. I was starting to think if I could just ignore the whole thing, and then I went on a walk. It wasn't too long or anything, just up and down my street. You know what I found? Flyers. Over a dozen of them, all just how I'd seen them described in these posts, down to the phone number. I felt like I was going to be sick. They were posted on lampposts, in the windows of the antique store, glued to walls in alleyways. They were everywhere, mocking me. I've lived on that street for 5 years and never seen a single one of them. And yet overnight, there they were. I took one down to bring home with me and get a closer look. It's laying on my desk as I turn on my laptop. When I unfold the flyer and smooth it out, it feels as though the clocks are looking at it over my shoulder. Their silent judgment a palpable weight. The paragraph is different from the ones I saw online. Are you losing time? Do you feel like you can't tell anyone what's happened to you? Does your internal clock feel out of sync? Do you know what you've done? Do you regret ever accepting that gift? Do you feel them ticking at you while you sleep? Do you remember what they looked like in your dreams? Can you see them? Can you hear them? Are you observing? Are you observing them? Do you wish you could just forget? Don't wait. Reclaim your time now. I know why they left them there for me. I know what they want. I know they meant to scare me, to intimidate me into giving them back. But my fear is crushed down by my anger. They're taunting me. It feels like they're laughing at me. I listened to what you all said. I bought enough clock-making kits to replicate them all. Different kinds from different eras, just to get the variety of them right. Spent a small fortune on them. After examining that unsettling flyer, I know what I have to do. It takes a long time to do it. I've spent hours doing it, disassembling the original clocks, meticulously documenting each gear and spring, then rebuilding them with blank faces, copying their intricate mechanisms, and then writing down each of their titles. Some of you said I should keep the copies, but I'm too sentimental to do that. As strange as my grandfather was, I loved him. He was a good grandfather. I can't just give the originals up, knowing my grandfather wanted me to have them. I moved the originals to the display cabinets my grandfather left me to store them in. Up until a few days ago, I was planning on just leaving the clocks in their boxes, hiding them in the attic or basement. They deserve better than that. While I'm putting them away, my mind wanders back to thoughts of my grandfather. I remember when I was younger, I spent a lot of time with him. I always got along better with him than my grandmother. We were both a couple of quiet thinkers. We could spend hours just sitting in silence near each other, doing our own thing. Usually I would read, and he'd be working on his ledgers. I remember one day when I was around 9, my grandmother had taken my cousin out to a museum that I didn't want to see, so I was staying home with my grandfather. I was reading an old adventure novel that my grandfather had gotten me, and he was writing in his ledger when his old rotary phone started ringing. I hardly even looked up when he went to answer it. I only really started paying attention when he started shouting. I walked down the stairs, still holding my book in my hands. As I peeked around the corner into the workshop, he was holding the receiver up to his ear, listening to someone talking on the other end. After a long moment of quiet speaking from the other end, his hand began to shake. He balled it into a fist and slammed it on the workbench, making me jump. I swear to goodness, Alistair, you stay the hell away from me and my family. Don't bring my blessed grandchildren into this. Whoever was on the other side, Alistair, I guess. He laughed at that. My grandfather's shoulders stayed tense when he talked. You're a terrible tyrant. You should have left when I did. Now look what's happening to you. His voice was cold and full of anger. He slammed the phone down onto the receiver and turned. When he saw me, he was startled. He asked me how much I'd heard. I lied to him. I told him I'd only been there for a few moments. He said he was sorry for yelling. Oh, I remember lying awake in bed that night. We lived in a quiet, older neighborhood, so I'd go to bed to the sound of distant church bells and the rhythmic ticking of grandfather's clocks downstairs. That night, I didn't hear any bells. If I focused hard enough, I could faintly hear the sound of gears grinding. Not like clockwork, but like something much larger, much older. I didn't look out my window, but it felt like something was waiting for me to see it. A subtle shift in the darkness beyond the glass. I called the coroner yesterday after another sleepless night. I dialed him up, hoping to get a little closure. When I told him who I was, Dr. Evelyn's tone changed on a dime, a note of reservation in her voice, like she knew it was coming. She asked me if I was sure I wanted to know. Part of me wishes I didn't say yes. She said she'd never seen anything like it before. When she'd done an autopsy on my grandfather, outwardly, there were no wounds, no bruises, no punctures or bullet holes anywhere on his body. There was his breakfast, only partially digested. No poison, no alcohol, no drugs. It wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't a tumor or a stroke. His eyes were completely marred, like something had aged them rapidly. But the thing that really caused his passing, supposedly, was in his head. When they opened it up, what greeted them was a massive, intricately woven brass gears and springs that occupied the space where his brain should have been. Like someone had replaced his internal workings with clockwork before pouring it back in. That's how she described it. She couldn't think of anything that could have done that. Neither could I. I slid the last clock into its place and let out a deep breath. Looking back at the waiting boxes of copied clocks, I take a seat at my desk and pull out my phone. It takes a moment of psyching myself up to key in the phone number on the flyer. There is a long ringing sound before someone picks up. Hello, this is Professor Finch speaking. How can I? He doesn't get to finish before I speak. I have the clocks.
He's quiet for a moment before letting out a little chuckle. Good. I'm glad you came to your senses, Daniel. You have my address. Be there at 10:15 p.m. on Friday, and I'll take them off your hands. While I have you, did you want to schedule an appointment? You sound like you need one. His voice is dripping with a smug condescension. I swallow thickly, my throat feeling dry. No, I'm all right. I'll be there.
I hang up the phone and set it down on my desk. I don't have the willpower to examine a scroll today. Once I get these Kronos people off my back, maybe then I'll start listening again. Maybe then I'll be able to get some rest. Calling the coroner and talking to this place has only left me with more questions than answers. If I could just put all of this together, I could see the full picture. I don't know where to look next, but maybe you do. I need all the help I can get. Thank you. I'm sorry for leaving you all hanging for so long. I should get you up to date on what's happened in the days I've been missing. He wasn't lying. The building was just where he'd said it was. A tall, modern office building on the 11th floor. past cubicles of people hunched over their desks, talking soothingly into their phones, into the office, with a brass nameplate on the door. He was there. He stood looking out the window like he owned the city below, with his hands folded behind his back. "Good evening, Mr. Bradshaw. Why don't you take a seat?" he said, without even turning to look at me. I did what I was told, finding no comfort in the sleek, minimalist armchairs that his office had to offer. He turned away from the window after a moment, taking a seat behind his desk and steepling his fingers. He was maybe in his early 60s. There was something subtly wrong about him. His smile lines a little too deep, hands too precise, his teeth a little too perfectly aligned in his mouth as he grinned welcomingly at me. It was less like a greeting and more like a barely concealed threat. I cleared my throat to speak, but as I did, he cut me off. "I'm so glad you had a change of heart. You really did the right thing by handing those over," he said. "I'm glad to give them back," I replied, reaching into my pocket. I could feel the reassuring weight of my phone in there, felt reassured by the click of the record button. I was curious about them. I didn't get the chance to examine them when I was a kid. I just wanted to ask why they're so important. Professor Finch smiled broadly, even wider than he already was. It made my skin crawl. "I thought you might ask that. They're recordings of our patients' temporal distortions, very personal. You know how it is, client confidentiality and all that. Do you mind if I ask why you record them, then?" He was quiet for a moment, smile deteriorating ever so slightly. Then he chuckled softly, sardonic and charismatic in a way that made me want to hit him. "You're a very curious man, aren't you, Mr. Bradshaw?" he said, reaching across his desk and adjusting his brass compass. "It's just part of our special kind of therapy. We find it's easier for patients to forget their temporal anomalies through recording these clocks. In the past, our patients have found them very useful for processing their issues. In fact, I know I asked you before, but perhaps you'd like to book a session for yourself." When he said it, my stomach dropped. I could feel sweat beading on the back of my neck. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, he cut me off again. "It really is a shame what happened to your grandfather. All that work for a futile goal. It really is disappointing, isn't it, Daniel?" He didn't give me the space to respond, continuing as he got up from behind his desk and walked around towards me. "It's difficult to put myself in your shoes, losing your grandfather so abruptly, and with such a strange cause of passing. You must be holding that weight with you, Daniel." I felt myself nodding before his words even registered. I shook my head, feeling a stinging pain pushing in against my temples. "It's all right, Daniel. You're probably very stressed. Maybe it would help to let your emotions out. I can get Dr. Kronos to come right away if you need."
We got up to my feet quickly. I didn't even notice how close he'd gotten until he was resting his hand on my shoulder. When I looked at him, I could feel my ears start to ring. He had that smile on his face, wide and unsettlingly full of teeth.
I felt sick, like having him so close was hurting me. "You're displaying something, Daniel." His mouth didn't move, lips drawn tight over rows of silvery teeth, too defined, too perfect, too straight, too metallic. I heaved weakly, managing to tear my eyes off him and down to my shirt, brass filings clinging to the fabric and having emerged from my nose onto my lips and chin. I stumbled backwards, shoving his hand off my shoulder and holding my head. The ringing stopped. His face was normal again. I swallowed thickly, staring at him.
My throat felt like sandpaper. I need to go.
His smile waned again, but he nodded, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "I understand. Here." He reached behind him and picked out a small calling card, presenting it to me. We should keep in touch. Any family of Elias is a friend of mine. I took the card. When I walked out of the office, holding a hand up to my face where the filings had been, the room of cubicles was silent, all sitting facing the wall in front of their desks, holding their phones up to their ears, but not speaking a word. I took the stairs, not wanting to wait for an elevator, rushing down the steps through the foyer where I'd left the boxes of copies with a receptionist, and out the door. That was about as much as my stomach could handle. So, it seemed, I felt overwhelming nausea, and stumbled towards the nearest potted plant. I'm not ashamed to say that doing it gave me some sense of retribution. My car wasn't parked too far away. I was thankful for that, climbing into the driver's seat, buckling the belt, and hitting the gas. I drove until I was far away from that place, until I was out on the outskirts of town. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, and I curled in on myself, leaning my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing shallowly as my heart tried to climb its way out of my chest. It felt like being squeezed into a tiny cog, like the world was too close around me, pressing the breath out of my lungs and making me panic. I've had panic attacks before, more frequently in the months since my grandfather's passing, but there were none like this. They never made my skin crawl and my stomach churn as badly as this. Never made my ears ring so loud I couldn't hear the cars passing by. This couldn't be happening. This whole conspiracy, this whole delusional bureau, it couldn't be real. But it was. It was. And I jumped in head first, without noticing how murky the water was. It took me a long time to calm down. I stayed like that, curled up in the car, for almost half an hour. I remembered the phone in my pocket and turned off the recording. It brought me comfort to know that what had happened had been documented. I drove home in silence, and all the while, my frustration overcame my fear and anxiety. When I reached the driveway, there was a package on the doorstep, a padded envelope. I picked it up, taking it inside with me and locking the door. I tried to be quiet when I walked up the stairs to my spare room. When I enter it, it feels like home. It feels like the clocks there have been waiting for me, patiently, knowing I'll be there eventually. I open the package. I'm not surprised to see it's a small, intricate pocket watch. Written on the side though, it's not an anomaly number. It reads, "To my eldest." My hands only quake slightly when I put it in the display case and press the hidden button. There's that familiar whirring buzz of old clockwork, the click and a light ticking. Is it? Oh, good, perfect. My grandfather's voice, light and jovial. This recording is for my grandson, Daniel Bradshaw, and only Daniel Bradshaw. I hope you're observing this, kiddo. I wanted you to receive this recording after you got the other ones, so I hope my friend listened to my instructions. I want you to listen very carefully. If you're hearing this recording, then it means I'm already gone, and I failed what I'm planning on doing. In that case, I want to say I'm sorry, and I truly wish it didn't have to be this way. But it is. I don't doubt that you've taken the liberty of observing the clocks. Maybe not all of them, but at least a few of them. You might already know about the Bureau. These clocks are recordings of the patients of the Chronos Observation Bureau, or Anomalous Temporal Perception Bureau. This organization seems well-meaning at first. Their mission is to help patients with trauma from unexplainable or temporal sources forget their problems. They pretend that they offer these services out of kindness or charity, but they're lying. The Bureau is using those clocks and the temporal distortions recorded on them for a different purpose. When patients at this Bureau give their statements, they truly do forget their trauma. The clocks hold whatever event they witnessed, taking a piece of their memory and leaving a blank spot where it was. The Bureau is an elaborate cover-up for the existence of unexplainable and dangerous temporal entities that exist in and around our reality. Before I met your grandmother, before we had you and your cousin, I was an archivist for that place. Over the time I worked there, I became close friends with Alistair Finch. He was higher up the food chain than me. I was supposed to just keep my head down and work. But he took a shine to me. I remember him telling me things that I wasn't allowed to know. Little things at first, but after a long while he got comfortable. He took me aside one day and asked me if I knew why we were keeping the clocks, why we were really keeping them. I told him I didn't. He asked me if I could keep a secret. Of course I could. I still remember the smile he got on his face when I said that. He leaned close and whispered it to me. Time. I didn't understand what he meant, so I told him, and he just laughed. He said, "It's time, Julian. Eternal time for something bigger than us. Food goes stale, water evaporates, light fades, but time will never expire." He told me if we feed it what it wants, if it lives forever, so will we. I didn't believe him at first. I thought he was crazy, but then I began to see it. Movement just out of the corner of my eye. Just behind that old grandfather clock. Just around that corner, a mirage, like something's there, but you aren't supposed to see it. It got to me, and I knew I had to do something about it. Late one night, after everyone in the office had gone home, I went into the archives. There were thousands of clocks, all neatly tucked away into display cases with their transcripts. I tried to work quickly, piling them into canvas bags and slipping away from town in my old beat-up car. I knew I couldn't keep them all in one place. They'd find me that way, and all my work would be for nothing. So I did what I could. I spent a year driving around the continent, leaving the clocks in small bursts in second-hand shops and antique stores, pawning them off where I could, leaving a trail of chronographs all over, hoping it would keep them at bay. Things were all right for a while. I settled down with your grandmother, got married, had you and then your cousin, and then I moved on to the second part of the plan. With the clocks spread out, I'd pull the rug out from under them, keeping whatever it is from forming, keeping them as distant from me as possible while I began to collect them again. I wanted to test my theory. I found one of the clocks closest to me, and I destroyed it, crushing its brass casing and shattering its delicate gears. The room went cold around me. For 3 days after, I didn't see the mirage following me. I was gearing up to shatter the latest batch again. I do them in small increments so your grandmother wouldn't get suspicious. When Finch called, he threatened to harm you, and your cousin threatened to end your lives if I didn't stop what I was doing and give them back. You were too precious to risk. I stopped destroying them. For a month, I stopped collecting them, and then I had an epiphany. I didn't have to destroy them. Just collecting them would be enough. At first you were always a curious kid. I remember how badly you wanted to know about the clocks. I kept collecting, knowing that eventually you would grow up. You would know how to protect yourself. When you moved away, I redoubled my efforts, writing the transcripts and leaving breadcrumbs for you to follow, just in case I failed my plan. The plan was to shatter them tomorrow night, to deal our first big blow to whatever this thing is. Clearly, since you're hearing this, I failed. The mirage caught up to me, and, well, I'm gone. I need you to carry on what I've started. You know what you have to do. In 2 days, you will receive a box with the supplies you will need and the instructions to do what you have to. I know you can do this. I'm so proud of you. I love you, son. The recording ends with a muted click. I rub at my teary eyes with the back of my hand, taking a shaky breath that rattles in my chest. I clear my throat as best I can and gingerly remove the miniature pocket watch from the display case. I know what I have to do now. I had trouble sleeping those nights. It's unsurprising knowing what I have to do. I want to hold on to my grandfather's memory more than anything. He was always there for me, no matter what, so destroying what I have left of him is painful. But it has to be done, so I'll finish what he started. The package arrived right when he said it would. It wasn't huge, a little smaller than a shoebox. In it were more clocks. My grandfather's old wire-rimmed spectacles, a set of car keys including a labeled key to a storage unit, and a beat-up old journal. The address to the storage unit was scrolled on the bottom of the cardboard box. I loaded the clocks into the back of my car in boxes and followed the address of the storage unit to find what my grandfather had left me. During the drive, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, the number displayed on the screen being from exactly who I'd expected. It seemed like the bureau wasn't keen on giving up yet. They could call me all they wanted, but I paid them no mind. As I pulled into the parking lot of the rundown temporal lock storage units at the outskirts of town, the garage-like door rattled as I unlocked it and pulled it up manually, wincing at its squealing groan. It wasn't cluttered, just my grandfather's old delivery van from when he was young, and 4 large containers of acid, etching acid, the kind used for metalwork. There was a faded photograph taped to the van with an address hastily written on the bottom. It was a picture of a wide, desolate salt flat, someplace nobody would look to find dissolved chronographs. I was glad he knew a place. I wouldn't have known where to start. I shifted all the clock boxes into the back of the van, followed by the acid containers, and then me. The drive to the salt flat was less like a drive and more like a funeral march, each mile amplifying the weight of my purpose. After weeks of torment and anxiety and sleepless nights, tonight, it had to end in some way or another, no matter how small. Tonight was the night it would end. Brother, I thought about my grandfather, thought about how the Bureau had taken him from us, or for whatever entity they were serving, when I was in that van, listening to the acid containers clunk against each other and the clocks chattering in their boxes. I wasn't afraid of anything. For all I cared, I could join my grandfather, as long as I took down at least a portion of whatever that perplexing bureau was with me. It was dark out on the salt flat where I parked the van, the moon high above, and the stars shining in the sky were the only things there to light the way. The clocks stacked up nicely in a wide patch of cracked earth, a pyramid of boxes jutting up defiantly towards the sky. The container was heavy in my hands when I poured the acid onto the pile. It felt surreal. I found myself laughing deliriously when I looked at the stack before me. I was staring it down again, just as I'd done in my spare room, this time with no curiosity or fear or dread, this time with a knowing, superlative hatred that churned in my stomach and made me grit my teeth.
I found a powerful laser pointer in the glove box of my grandfather's van, right next to his old clockmaker's hammer that I held tightly in my hand, with assured victory within sight. I don't think you want to do that, Daniel.
My hair had already stood up on end before he even spoke. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't have to. Far away, across the salt flat, his master was there in a way I didn't see, but felt like the drop of your stomach before the plunge of a roller coaster, but 1,000,000 times worse. I think I do, I said. He walked toward me slowly, and I turned only slightly towards him. It's not the man I met in that room. His smile stretched wider than I'd ever seen anyone's lips, teeth like broken shards of glass, or like the interlocking gears of a broken watch. He was taller than I remembered, stretched like taffy, with hands hanging limp at his sides. Just give them back, Daniel. You've come so far. Just give up, he hissed out, mouth not moving, but beady black eyes squinting at me with unfettered malice. My hands were shaking when I reached into the pocket of my coat, pulling out my grandfather's clockmaker's hammer. and pulling back my arm. The sound of the hammer striking his head was a heavy impact, ringing out like a broken bell. I thought I was going to be unwell when it hit him, right between the eyes. An easy shot. He was so close to me. He reeled backwards, and I snatched up my laser pointer, frantically attempting to turn it on over the uneven dirt. Across the salt flat, the creature wailed like the sound of grinding stone, an echoing fury. I flicked and flicked and flicked, and then Professor Finch tackled me to the ground, sending my laser pointer bouncing away over the uneven dirt. I tried to roll over, feeling his arms wrapping around me like iron bands as his neck began to distend and stretch behind me. I cried out, knowing nobody would hear, writhing in his grasp until I could worm my way free. I kicked at him, slamming my boot into his face and rolling to my side. When I finally caught sight of him, I felt my ears begin to ring. He'd gotten even worse, where he was hunched over on the floor, grunting and panting, his form contorting, his jawline unnaturally widening, displaying sharp metallic points as long, spindly, metallic appendages unfurled from his frame. I didn't have time to dwell on the horror that was once Professor Finch. I had clocks to dissolve. I lunged for the laser pointer, stumbling to snatch it up. The cold metal in my hand was comforting as I righted myself on my feet and tried to flick it on again. "Daniel," Professor Finch roared. I didn't look back, but I began to run, stumbling through the cracked earth, away from him, out of instinct, cupping my hand around the flickering beam of my laser pointer. I could feel brass filings clinging to my lips and chin. I could see the salt flat shimmer and distort where the creature in the distance ran, its glowing ochre eyes staring me down with a hateful glee that made my stomach churn. Finally, the laser flicked on, bright and warm, in my hands. I let out a triumphant laugh, making a U-turn to run towards the pile, before I felt long clawed hands grab me by the shirt. Professor Finch's body was hanging by a group of 6 spider-like, creaking, spindly legs, his long, squirming fingers gripping me tight as he laughed, voice echoing like there were 3 of him behind me. I wanted to weep. I was so close.
I was so close. The creature came to a halt in front of me, laughing at me like a pack of hyenas. Professor Finch's other hand shifted up, tangling in my hair and wrenching my head back to stare up at the creature's eyes before me. And the only way I can think to describe it is when you're a child and you're in a dark room. It's less the fear of what the room is, and more the fear that the room is full of something you can't see that wants to harm you. I hadn't felt that type of fear in a long, long time. It towered over me, and didn't. It was there, and it wasn't. It was going to consume me just by being in my line of sight.
"Look at it, Daniel." The thing behind me howled with laughter, yanking on my hair and forcing me to look. Every time I tried to turn away, I could feel bile rising in my throat, brass emerging from my nose. I heaved, my eyes burning with pain, and in that moment I saw white. My ears stopped hearing. My eyes stopped seeing from the burning hot pain that rose into my head, and there was peace. For a long, deathly moment, it was a fig tree in the eye of a storm, a moment's silence before the worst came. And in that moment I squeezed my eyes shut, and with a certain flick of my thumb, I felt the laser ignite the acid, and I let it fall from my hands. To say that those monsters screamed would be like calling a drizzle a deluge. The acid hit the clocks, and the boxes began to fizz and dissolve in a split second. I felt the thing that was once Professor Finch drop me to the ground and begin to convulse, shaking and shuddering and screaming as its metallic legs began to crack apart, falling to the ground along with its master, like a broken automaton with cut wires. I heaved, my body convulsing, red and shaking from head to toe. I couldn't bring myself to get up and run. So instead, I rolled over onto my back and looked up at the dark night sky. There was a seam in the sky, like someone had slashed a long curved line in it. It opened, and I felt the breath leave my lungs. An eye, as big as the world itself, slid open, glowing ochre with a pupil full of all the stars in the sky, lined with gears that made up its mouth. It shifted to look down at me, blinking once before letting out a long, bone-chilling, grinding tone. I wanted it to take me. I wanted to escape this sight, but it wouldn't let me. Instead, the monsters that lay around me began to crack and convulse even worse, screaming out in a language I didn't know but could understand perfectly. They were forsaken by it. Their trust turned against them as they compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed until there was nothing left of them but the scars they'd left on my psyche. And then it slid shut, and the seam in the sky was gone. I laid there on the salt flat for hours. I didn't move until the acid had dissolved away all that was left of those clocks, until I knew there was nothing around me for miles but salt and corrosion. In my van, when I got to my feet, I was shaking, drenched in sweat and acid-stained clothes. All the stars in the sky were golden, ochre eyes, peering down at me with judgment for what I'd done. The sound of the van door closing behind me is like a coffin being closed. I start up the car with a sputtering noise and fix my grandfather's old glasses where they sit on my nose. I take a deep breath, and my hands shake on the wheel. But I don't break. I don't cry, or scream or panic. Despite the pounding heartbeat in my chest, I pull out of the salt flat slowly, trying to keep my breathing even. Even though he isn't here to say it, I know that my grandfather is proud of me, wherever he is. I wanted to thank you for your help and your interest in my research. There's a lot of work ahead of me if I want to try to keep anyone else from succumbing to a fate like my grandfather's. His journal should hold the answers to what I have to do now. There's a lot I still don't understand, and your input has been life-saving on a few occasions, honestly. But all I know is that I'm going to have a lot of driving to do.